Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everyone once again to our Sameach's virtual pre-Pesach seminar program. Zecher Nishmas Chaim and Zavakain. So far, we've had the privilege of hearing from Kiva Tatz, gave us an understanding of Pesach on a deeper level. We heard from Rabbi Breitowitz, who was part one of an overview of the Haggadah. We heard from Rabbi David Kaplan, stories that will add flavor to the Seder. All those presentations are available on ohr.edu. You can get them in case you want to pass them on to a friend or listen to them again. And today we have the privilege of hearing from our beloved Rav of Kehilas Sameach, a world-renowned lecturer, rabbinical authority. Anybody who heard his brilliant presentation for part one, I'm sure is waiting anxiously, as I am, to begin part two. Rabbi Breitowitz, without any further ado, look forward to part two of a deeper understanding of the Haggadah.
Thank you, Danny. And again, it's a privilege to participate in this program. Again, as I said before, I want to extend my personal gratitude and our Sameach institutional gratitude for all that Danny and the Mentor's Mission, which he really started a number of years ago, is doing for us. And B'ezras Hashem, we should have many, many fruitful years of collaboration. And of course, the ultimate goal is to spread the Torah of Hashem and to help bring as many Jews as we possibly can back to the Messiah of Torah and their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, Pesach is all about that. Pesach is the reestablishment or the establishment of that indissoluble bond between Hashem and Bnei Yisrael. We left the Avdus of Paro and we became the Avodim of Hashem. And as I indicated in my last year, even people who in their own daily lives are very, very far from observing the Torah, when Pesach comes around, there is something almost subconscious that is pulling them to want to connect. Hasidus calls that, of course, the Pintel Yid, the famous spark of Judaism that is within the heart of every Jew, no matter how far they may seem to be. In fact, there's a beautiful thought I once heard from Lubavitcher Rabbi. We use in the field, we use the expression kiruv rechokim. Kiruv rechokim means to draw people who are far away from Hashem, to draw them near. That's a very common expression, kiruv rechokim. But Lubavitcher Rebbe actually said he didn't like the phrase kiruv rechokim because that implies the Jew is far from God. And in reality, every Jew is close to God. They may not know it yet. So as a result, you're not taking a rachok and making him a karov. What you're doing is you're taking someone that is a karov and perhaps giving them a greater awareness of the korva that is already there. Again, I don't want to change the common language that we employ, but I think it's a very beautiful thought to think about. In my part two of the Haggadah, I want to take one of the mitzvos of the Seder and kind of integrate it with the narrative of the Haggadah itself. That is, we know that one of the mitzvos of the Seder is that we have to drink 4 cups of wine at various points in the Seder. We drink a cup of wine after Kiddush, and then we recite the Haggadah over wine, and we drink a cup of wine at the end of the Magid, and then we bench over wine, and we drink a cup of wine after Birkat HaMazon, and then finally we recite Hallel over a cup of wine, and we drink the 4th cup at the conclusion of Hallel. By the way, you'll notice that I said 2 different things. In other words, the mitzvah of drinking the 4 cups of wine is not simply the mitzvah of drinking the wine, but it is a mitzvah of recitation over a cup of wine. For example, if I were to recite the Haggadah, and after I finished the Magid, I would pour myself a 2nd cup and drink it, that would be insufficient. The mitzvah of Dalit Kosos is not only the drinking of the wine, but the mitzvah of Dalit Kosos is the recitation over what is called a kos shel bracha, a cup over which you're going to recite a blessing. So Kiddush ala kos, Magid ala kos, Birkas HaMazon ala kos, Hallel al hakos. That is the mitzvah of the 4 cups of wine. Why do we drink 4 cups of wine? Interestingly enough, the Babylonian Talmud does not give us any reason other than pointing out there are 4 recitations. I'm sorry? Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. Does someone want to say something? Okay, sorry. The Talmud Bavli gives no reason other than you have 4 recitations: Kiddush, Haggadah, Birkat Hamazon, Hallel. So each recitation needs a Kaishel bracha. However, the famous reason that even children know from Cheder is actually not in the Talmud Bavli at all. It is from the Talmud Yerushalmi, and it is quoted by both Rashi and Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam, in their commentaries to Arvei Psachim, that the reason why we drink 4 cups of wine is keneged, is to correspond to the 4 terms of redemption that Hashem communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu. Lochein emor lifnei Yisrael, tell b'nei Yisrael, I am God. Hotseisi, I will take them out. Hitzalti, I will save them. Bigoalti, I will redeem them. V'lokachti eschem li le'am, I will take them to me for a nation. These are 4 lashonot of Geula, and we have a kos keneged each lashon of Geula. And even though there is a 5th lashon, I will bring them to the land that I promised to the Avos. And indeed, there is one opinion in the Gemara, Rabbi Tarfon, who actually says you should have a 5th cup. And the Maral even says that it's a proper custom to have, and some Hasidim to this day have a 5th cup. Lahalacha, we do not paskin a 5th cup because we consider the 5th lashon to be fulfilled not when you have even a state of Israel, but only limot hamashiach, which should be b'mheira v'yameinu, and until the Mashiach comes, we do not drink the 5th cup. And in fact, that is actually the origin of what is called Eliyahu's cup, that Ashkenazim have, that we have a cup that we do not drink from, a cup of wine, and that is said to be set aside for Eliyahu HaNavi, who will announce the coming of Mashiach. And when Eliyahu HaNavi comes, we will drink that 5th cup. Right now, it is simply a reminder of messianic aspiration. By the way, as a little aside, countless generations of parents tell their children that Eliyahu HaNavi visits every Seder and takes a drink from the cup. And if you look at the cup carefully, you'll see it go down. And Abba might even knock the cup a little bit so some wine spills. As far as I know, now I might be wrong, there is a makar in Chazal that Eliyahu HaNavi does visit every Seder. So that indeed has a source in our tradition. But I'm not aware of a makar in Chazal that Eliyahu HaNavi actually drinks from the wine at every Seder. So that might be a Baba Maisa, but again, perhaps it's recorded somewhere that I am not aware of. Now, here's the question, though. Assuming that the reason why we have 4 cups of wine is because of the 4 Lashonot of Geula, why do we have 4 Lashonos of Geula? Yetzias Mitzrayim was a unitary event. God took the Jews out of Mitzrayim. That is one Geula. Why is that Geula memorialized in 4 expressions of Geula? What is the point? If you're simply going to give synonymous repetitions, we were redeemed. So have 5 Geulas, have 6 Geulas, have 10 Geulas. Yetzias Mitzrayim was a unitary event. So the Meforshim give us different understandings. The Nitziv, for example, understands that Geulat Mitzrayim did proceed in stages chronologically over several months. The first stage was Hashem terminated, or Paro released us from Avodas Perech, back-breaking labor. So that's Geula number 1, but we were still slaves. The second, we were redeemed from slavery, but we weren't allowed to leave the country. The third was Yetzias Mitzrayim, we could leave the country. And the 4th is Matan Torah, which is the ultimate purpose of Geula. I will take you unto me for a nation. So the Nitziv, Al Pi Pshat, simply looks at the 4 Lashonot of Geula as different sequential stages in redemption. But the Meshech Chochmah, actually Rav Meir Simcha Cohen, he is of course the great rabbi after whom Or Sameach is named, because his famous book in the Rambam was Or Sameach. So the Meshech Chochmah actually says that the reason why there are 4 Lashonos of Geula is because when we were slaves in Egypt, there were 4 dangers that we faced. And Hashem had to redeem us from 4 dangers. So even if Yetziat Mitzrayim is a unitary event, it comprises 4 redemptions from 4 sakanos that could have destroyed us. What are these 4 sakanos? So the first sakana that a slave population faces is spiritual obliteration. That as slaves in a very, very tameh, decadent, degenerate, immoral culture, over a prolonged period of time, 210 years, we naturally become assimilated to the values of that decadent, immoral culture, even as slaves. Now, granted, I won't call it assimilation per se, because obviously, if we're slaves, we're not able to freely assimilate into the host culture, but the values get absorbed. And indeed, this did happen to Klal Yisrael. We are told that Klal Yisrael reached the 49th level of impurity. And once you hit level 50, you're not even redeemable. And had we stayed even the little amount of time that it takes for dough to become chametz, a few minutes, we would have hit level 50. We would have been irredeemable. As it were, only 1/5 of our population was redeemed, meaning they were the ones on level 49. 4/5 of the population that had died during the plague of darkness, they apparently did hit level 50. So obviously, a very, very significant danger that any slave faces in a culture, and that Klal Yisrael faced, was the devastation of losing our values, losing our morality, losing our ethics, losing our sense of relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is the danger and the nisayon of spiritual assimilation. The second sakana is literally the sakana to our physical lives. Remember, the Egyptians, number one, at various points practiced genocide, throwing the Nile, throwing newborns into the walls that were being constructed. But even when there was not deliberate genocide, think about the Holocaust. People died of disease, of exhaustion, of starvation. Obviously, when there's avodas perech and people are being enslaved, there is great, great danger to their ability to physically survive that slavery. So there is the danger to the spirit, and there is the danger to the body, that second sakana. Third sakana is a bit more subtle, and that is a slave over time loses a sense of history and roots. They don't have a sense of where they come from. Some of you from the United States, or if you're a little older at least, you might remember in the 1970s, I think it was, or maybe the 1980s, Alex Haley was a Black author, Black journalist, who went back and he did some genealogical research into his family. And it turned out that his ancestors were African slaves, but they were taken from Africa, where some of them had been kings and royalty. And he wrote a book called Roots, and Roots was made into a made-for-TV series and the like. It was very, very popular. And he uncovered the fact that over the course of persecution, in which day after day you're getting the message that you're a nothing, you're a nobody, a slave loses a sense of being connected to something greater than himself. There is no past. Where did you come from? What are your origins? What is your yichus? What is your family? And after all, in a slave society, parents are separated from children, husbands from wives. Right? So that was a great sakana, that a slave does not have a sense of history. And as the saying goes, if you don't know where you're coming from or where you've come from, you don't really know what direction you should be going. A sense of history is very fundamental to personal identity and very fundamental to spiritual identity in particular. So that was the third danger. The fourth danger was lack of hope, hopelessness. As the slavery continues without end, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, at some point that engenders within the spirit a sense of hopelessness. Things will never change. What they are is what they always would be. And the power of hope in the human condition is very, very significant. Even medically, there's a lot of medical evidence to the effect that when a patient convinces themselves they are not going to get better after a medical procedure or the like, the body starts shutting down to a point of no return. Even voodoo, a person believes that if somebody sticks a needle in their effigy, they're going to drop dead. If they believe that, even though there's no basis for that belief, and they see somebody stick a needle into their effigy, they drop dead. It's like a reverse placebo effect. It's a negative placebo effect. Your hope or your lack of hope can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And when you lose hope, then in a sense, something in you has died. So the Meshech Chochmah is telling us, and again, we'll see, we'll develop this at greater length in a few moments. The Meshech Chochmah is telling us that the reason why we have 4 Lishonot of Geula is because although the exodus of Egypt, from Egypt, was a unitary, singular event, there were 4 problems from which we needed to be extricated: spiritual assimilation, physical annihilation, a lack of history, and a lack of hope. But now, here the Meshech Chochmah takes a wonderful turn. And he says, in order to merit Hashem redeeming you from these 4 sorrows, there must be some behavior on your part that addresses them. Now, it doesn't have to be, more than 50%. There's a famous chazal that Hashem says to us, open for me a little hole in your heart the size of a needle, the eye of a needle, and I will open up for you like the doors of the ulam, the antechamber of the Beis Hamikdash. So God does most of the work, but God requires that there be something on our end that addresses the problem. And when we've done the little bit that we're able to do, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes over. But if we don't do what we're able to do, then Hashem is not going to do what he needs to do, what we need him to do. In the language of Kabbalah, this is called Isarusa Delatata. This is Aramaic, the awakening from below. That in order to induce Isarusa Deliela, in order to get the awakening from above, we need the awakening from below. That if there's a danger of spiritual assimilation, physical annihilation, loss of history, and lack of hope, there must be behaviors mitzidenu that address those issues. And what are those behaviors? So here, the Meshech Chochmah focuses on a text that appears in several different versions. So some of the versions that you might be familiar with may be different than the version he uses. But he uses the version of a text as it is found in the Mechilta. And the Mechilta says that although the Jews in Mitzrayim had reached the 49th level of impurity, they were idol worshippers. They were not even practicing circumcision, except for the tribe of Levi. But there were 4 zechuyot, there were 4 merits that enabled them to be taken out of Mitzrayim. Merit number 1, Gedurim Ba'arayot. That means they were faithful in their marriages. They did not cohabit with the Egyptian women, although apparently they had opportunity. And therefore, because of their faithfulness to their wives and their not getting contaminated with either intermarriage or sexual relationships with the Egyptian women or women with men, Jewish women with men as well. You'll remember the Torah gives us the story of the son of the Egyptian man and the Jewish woman who blasphemed and cursed God. And the Torah says that he was eventually stoned. Rashi makes the point that this was the only case in all of the history of the Jews in Mitzrayim where there had been cohabitation between an Egyptian man and a Jewish woman. So zechus number one is gedurim bi'arayot, loyalty and faithfulness to the marriage of a Jewish man and a Jewish woman. Then it mentions zechus number two, they did not speak lashon hara against each other. Now here we do have to understand what that means. This does not mean they were learning one paragraph of the Sefer Chafetz Chaim every day and calling the Shmiras HaLashon hotline. It could very well be that between themselves, they were speaking Lashon Hara. They gossiped. They weren't keeping the mitzvah, so to speak, of Shmirat HaLashon. But rather, it's making a different point, and that is they didn't turn against their fellow Jew by reporting negative things about their fellow Jews to the authorities, to the Egyptian authorities, in order to get favorable conditions. They had a united front. So the point is not so much Shemiras HaLashon. The point is group solidarity and Avas Yisrael. Now, even during the Holocaust, superimposed on the awesome, unbearable grief of the destruction of European Jewry, a loss that we feel to this very day and that we will never get over, and we should not ever get over. But superimposed over that awesome grief is the phenomenon that there were occasions, and Baruch Hashem, I'm not going to say there were many occasions, but there were occasions in which Jews did collaborate with the Nazis. Now, again, they did it because they thought this was their only chance to survive, the only way they could save themselves, their wives, their children. Most of the time that failed, by the way. The Nazis got whatever information they got and then proceeded to kill the collaborators as well. So it was an awful thing. But one could understand it from a humanistic standpoint. That sometimes, if the only way I can survive is by turning against my fellow Jew and collaborate with the enemy, I might do it under extreme conditions. In Mitzrayim, Chazal are telling us, no Jew turned against another Jew to get some advantage with the Egyptians. And of course, this can be vividly seen by the fact that, let's take the case of Dasan and Aviram. Dasan and Aviram are the great troublemakers in the Midbar who constantly question and berate Moshe and Aaron. And they, of course, participated in Korach's revolt. And they died when the ground opened up. So in our tradition, they are certainly not righteous people. They are certainly not righteous people. And yet they made the cut. They made the 1/5 cut. 4/5 died. Dasan and Aviram left. What was their merit? And Chazal say, Dasan and Aviram were taskmasters in Egypt. And it was their job to report to the Egyptians if any Jew didn't make his quota of bricks for that day. And if the quota fell short and the Egyptians asked Dasan and Aviram, who is the shirker? Who is the guy that didn't do his work? Dasan and Aviram refused to reveal that information, and they got beaten. They got whipped rather than reveal the failure of a fellow Jew. So the point I want to emphasize is that in this merit number 2, Lo Dibru Lashon Hara, it seems that the overall context of that zechut was not so much a generic care, zehirut, in Shemirat HaLashon, but rather a group solidarity and Avat Yisrael the idea that we are united. We are not going to turn against our fellow Jew for whatever advantage we could get in food or living conditions from the Egyptian overseers. So merit number one is, yes, so I see that people ask, of course, the very famous question, but I hope that I actually answered that question. Rashi says that the reason Moshe Rabbeinu had to run away was because when he hit the Egyptian, when he said the name of God and the Egyptian dropped dead, was because Moshe Rabbeinu saw this is a people of Lashon Hara, and therefore they are not deserving of being redeemed. My point was that they had no problem with saying Lashon Hara against Moshe because they looked at Moshe as kind of a turncoat. Moshe grew up in the royal home of Paro. They did not feel that Moshe was one of them. And in fact, I would actually submit that Dasan V'Aviram's hatred of Moshe was that they took the idea that we got beaten, and here is this guy who grew up in the palace, who all of a sudden becomes the boss. But vis-a-vis their fellow slaves, there indeed was a tremendous group loyalty. Now, these third zechus is they didn't change their names. They kept their names, their Jewish names. They could have used Egyptian names. Presumably, the Egyptians gave them new names, and they didn't take it. They kept their Jewish names. And the fourth zechus was they didn't change their language. They continued to speak Lashon HaKodesh. So these are the four zechuyos, again, faithful in their marriages and not having relations with the Egyptians. Number two, not speaking Lashon Hara to the authorities to get advantages. Number three, not changing their names. Number four, the preservation of Lashon HaKodesh. So this is the Mechilta. This is a Mechilta. The Meshech Chachma wants to say that these four merits correspond to the four dangers, meaning these are four behaviors, each of which address one of the four dangers. And let's go in this order. Danger number one was that in the course of servitude, you lose your values, you lose your morality, you lose your ethics, you lose your sense of what is life about. And indeed, the Jews were affected immensely by being on the 49th level of Tumah and being Oved Avodah Zarah. But says Reb Meir Simcha, what was the behavior that at least prevented at least the 20% from hitting level number 50? What was the behavior that kept some remnant, some shemetz, some microscopic particle of Shekhinah in their lives? It was the faithfulness of the marital bond. Chazal tell us, Ish ve'isha, Shekhinah sheruya beinehem, that in the shalom that exists between a husband and a wife is the divine presence. Husband and wife are the Mishkan, are the dwelling place of the Shekhinah. And in the faithfulness of a Jewish marriage, even in the light of an overwhelming culture of decadence and immorality, there was the holding of a spark of divinity. Again, it didn't make them tzaddikim, it didn't make them from, it didn't make them shomerei mitzvos. They were over the Avodah Zarah, except for the tribe of Levi. But it kept them connected in a way that they didn't drop to level number 50. And that was the Yisarusa Dilatata. That was the arousal from below that allowed Hashem to be guileless from above. Now, the second danger was danger to our lives, whether it's through genocide, starvation, disease, exhaustion. Jews died. Now, to some degree, of course, Hashem countered that with the extraordinary fertility rate. That was part of it as well. The great fertility rate was a compensation, at least in the general sense. But what was our behavior that protected our physical survival? This was the achdus, this was the unity of not speaking Lashon Hara. Because it is well known that when there is achdus and unity in Klal Yisrael, that is the great protection against external threat. I believe it was either Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Paine, I have to look up the quote, who said at the time of the American Revolution that we must hang together, for if we don't hang together, we shall surely hang separately. And Chachma Bagoyim Tamin, we can take that bit of wisdom even from the non-Jewish world, and of course it corresponds with numerous Maimer Mamorei Chazal, that when there's not Achdus in Klal Yisrael, we are weak, we are vulnerable. The Umos HaOlam will have a shalita over us. And it is the Achdus and the unity that elicits special divine protection, that protects us. You know, in V'hi Sha'amda, we're going to say the beautiful paragraph in the Haggadah, V'hi Sha'amda Lavoseinu V'lanu, and that which has stood for us and our forefathers, Shalai Echad Bilvad Amad Aleinu L'chaloseinu. It is not only one person or one nation that has tried to destroy us. Ela sheb'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, omdim aleinu l'chaloseinu, there are those who rise up to destroy us. V'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam, and Hashem will save us. So when we go back to the beginning of that phrase, Shalai echad bilvad amad aleinu l'chaloseinu, it is not only one that has tried to destroy us. The Sfas Emes retranslates it a little bit. Instead of saying it is not only one, he translates Shaloi Echad Bilvad. It is only the fact that we are not one. Shaloi Echad Bilvad. It is only the fact that we are not one. That is Amad Aleinu L'chaloseinu. Again, it doesn't fit the rest of the sentence. I'm asking to that, but at least taking that particular phrase in isolation. This is a brilliant, ingenious translation of that phrase. You know, often Israeli newspapers, every few years, they have surveys of the population as to what they regard as the most serious problems in society. And they try to actually get a cross referencing of all the different groups, whether it's Haredi to whatever degree it was, or Dati Leumi, secular, Chiloni, etc. And unfortunately, in the modern state of Israel, there are many, many problems that a person could list, ranging from the threat of nuclear war with Iran, terrorism, even the cost of housing. But the number one problem that is always identified in all of these surveys, whether the respondent is Haredi, Hasidic, to whatever degree they get Hasidim to respond, Dati Leumi or secular, is lack of Achdus and Sinat Chinam. Now, of course, in many, many ways, I fully understand that this is kind of reminiscent of Mark Twain's famous quip about the weather. Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Unfortunately, Harabim, I think all of us understand how serious the lack of unity is in Am Yisrael, the Sinas Chinam, the Machlokas, the divisiveness. And we often feel that there's not a lot we can do about it. And all I can say is that at least on the one-to-one, there is a lot that we can do in terms of being Makabel Kol Adam B'Sever Panim Yafos, in terms of extending Shabbos invitations, in terms of learning with people, in terms of making a Kiddush Hashem in the way we behave as religious Jews. Let me just point out a beautiful, beautiful pasuk in Mishlei that I would suggest people should put on their refrigerators. I was going to say their mirror, but the mirror's in the bathroom. You shouldn't have a pasuk in the bathroom. The pasuk in Mishlei says, Kemayim apanim el panim, Kain leifa adam liyadam, as water reflects the face that you show to the water, so too the heart of a human being reflects that which you show it. And the Vilna Gaon explains that when I look at the water, the face that I see in the water is the face that I show the water. I show the water a smiling face, a welcoming face, the water will show me back my face, a smiling face, a welcoming face. I show the water a frowning face, an angry face. The water will show me the angry face. So Shlomo HaMelech says, the same way the water reflects the face that you show it, the heart of another person is going to reflect that which you show it. Again, I don't want to be married on this because this would take much longer than we have tonight. I understand that obviously, in the interests of emes, of truth, there are ideas that we have to oppose. We can't live a life in which every single thing that is out there is, I'm okay, you're okay, everything is kosher, everything is fine. One has to stand up for the Teiras Hashem. One has to be zealous for the Teiras Hashem. One should not compromise truth. And I understand that. That is very, very true. But at the same time, my connection to an individual Jew has to be one of love and respect and acknowledging that they too are in the image of Hashem and are a child of Hashem. And when that Jew can feel that I really care about them, then they will be open and care about me. That's why one of the reasons, I don't want to get too political, why in the state of Israel, dialogue between religious and non-religious is always non-productive, almost always. I'm not going to say 100% of the time, because Baruch Hashem, nothing is 100% bad, but it's a pretty high percentage, because the culture, and it's not after the religious culture, the Israeli culture generally is that when you oppose somebody, they're an idiot or they're evil. So each side looks at the other as evil or parasite or Amalek. Well, if I look at you as evil, parasite, Amalek, you will look at me as evil, parasite, Amalek, whichever side you're at. So consequently, we have a never-ending spiral of bitterness and recrimination, because there is never an acknowledgement of the goodness or the potentialities in the other side. So consequently, going back to the main thought over here, if Gedurim Bi'arayas was our protection against spiritual assimilation, the Loi Dibru Lashon Hara, which is Achdus and group solidarity and understanding we're in the same boat, that was our protection against physical annihilation. We now come to the third sakana that we faced. The third sakana that we faced was the sakana of losing a sense of connection to your history, not knowing that you came from great people, not knowing that there were Gedolim, Kedoshim, Tzaddikim in your background, thinking that you're a nobody and you came from nobody. So here the Meshech Chochmah says, this part of the word is a little difficult, but this is what he says, that the behavior mitzidenu that gave our children a sense of history was the preservation of Jewish names. Because Jewish names are a connection to the past. Ashkenazim, of course, again, it's a little anachronistic. Ashkenazim, of course, only name after people who are no longer alive, so obviously you're connecting to ancestors. And even though Sephardim, let's say, will name after people that are alive, but still, generally speaking, a name is a connection to the past. So if someone is an Avram, a Yitzchak, a Yaakov, a Sarah, a Rivka, an Esther, a Devorah, whether it's after the personalities of our Avos and Imahos, or whether it's after a grandfather or an aunt or an uncle, all of this connects us to our past. Even the Yiddish diminutives, although this is anachronistic, when you call somebody Bubbala, little Bubby, Mamala, little Mommy, Zaydala, what you're doing is you're reminding that child that you're connected to a past. You come from greatness and goodness and people that served Hashem and people that lived good and worthy lives. You're not a nobody that simply came out of nothing. And here I do want to add that sometimes a person might say, well, What if I'm a ger? What if I'm a non-Jew? I don't come from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. What is my connection to my history? What is my connection to my past? So, B'kitzur, I just want to say two things about that. That chas v'shalom, the ger should never, ever feel excluded. And that's really for two reasons. One reason is, as the Rambam himself writes, if you have taken on the belief systems of Avram and Sarah, you are their child. That is why a ger is ben Avraham, bas Avraham, because being a child of Avraham doesn't have to mean there's a biological connection. You are a child of Avraham by embracing the monotheism of Avraham Avinu. That's answer number one. And answer number two, I have to tell you, that even the non-Jewish origin itself is nothing necessarily to be ashamed of. A person may have learned many, many good things from their non-Jewish family. They may have learned honesty, courage, commitment. And these midot are going to be carried over into their Jewish identity and into their Jewish family. And I personally know many gerim whose parents or grandparents were involved in helping Jews in many, many ways, sometimes risking their own lives during the Holocaust. So that connection to history can even be on the non-Jewish side. But be it as it may, the Meshech Chochmah says, the names connected Am Yisrael to the past. And then we have the final fourth sakana. And the fourth sakana is lack of hope. The sense that things are never going to change. Now, yes, remember, Moshe Rabbeinu only showed up a year before the Exodus. So, excuse me, so for all of those years, there was no Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu was in Paro's house, but in terms of knowing there would be a redemption, people could give up hope. Decade after decade, nothing's happening. So here the Meshech Chochmah says that speaking Lashon HaKodesh counteracts that. You know, there are many languages in the world that are no longer spoken, that at one time were very, very popular languages. Latin was the language of the Roman Empire that had occupied most of the known world. Latin now, I mean, it's studied as an academic course, but Latin is not a spoken language, even in the Catholic Church, which was the last vestige of Latin in its ritual. Officially, the Catholic Church does not have to do its services in Latin. Now, again, there are some that you might call ultra-Orthodox Catholics who don't accept the Pope, and they still conduct the Latin Mass, but that's not the official teaching. And you could get an Assyrian dictionary, and you can get an Ammonite dictionary, and an Edomite dictionary, all of these nations. But nobody speaks these languages. And nobody speaks these languages because the nations are extinct. There is no need to speak Latin because there is no Roman Empire and it's not coming back. So now let's go to Mitzrayim. The Jewish people had a language that they used in their land, but now they're in Egypt and they've been in Egypt for decades and decades and decades. Why are you speaking Hebrew? Why are you teaching your child Hebrew? Hebrew is like Ugaritic, it's like Assyrian. It's like Hittite. What would the purpose be other than a parent telling their child? It's true that we don't have our own land and we don't need our own language, but there will come a time. I don't know if it's in my lifetime and I don't even know if it's in your lifetime, but there will come a time in which there will be a redemption. And Hashem will take us out of this slavery and we will come to our land and then we will need our language. So we're lovingly preserving this language as an affirmation of hope that there will be a Geula. Now, of course, let me point out the relationship of Lashon HaKodesh to modern Hebrew is a very, very interesting one. A colleague of mine who teaches at Or Sameach, Rabbi Reuven Klein, wrote a very excellent book. You can get it on Amazon about Lashon HaKodesh, the development of the Hebrew language. And he discusses this. It is true that modern Israeli Hebrew is not the same as the holy language of Lashon HaKodesh, but it is pretty close. It is pretty close. I mean, obviously, if a person is a speaker of modern Hebrew, they will be able to understand much of what is in Tanakh. So that particular issue I leave for Rabbi Klein's discussion, a very, very excellent and illuminating discussion. But nevertheless, you see the Meshech Chochmah's point. So again, so far we have the following idea. 4 Lashonos of Geula, because of 4 dangers that we faced: spiritual assimilation, physical annihilation, lack of history, lack of hope. But those 4 dangers had to be addressed by behaviors mitzidenu, that is the isarusa dilatata, the inspiration from below, that elicits the inspiration from above. Faithfulness to the marital bond was our spiritual protector. Not speaking Lashon Hara gave us physical asylum. Our names gave us a sense of history and connection to the past. And the preservation of Lashon HaKodesh is hope and affirmation that there will be a redemption and a reason to speak our own language. So now the final piece of the puzzle is how all of this relates to the positioning of the kosos in the Seder itself. Now this will be a slightly different order, but you'll see all 4. The kos rishon is Kiddush, right? I recite Kiddush on a cup of wine, and then I drink that cup of wine. Now, in a sense, that's not unique because every Shabbos and Yom Tov I make Kiddush. But in the context of the Seder, it is unique because in addition to simply being the kos of Kiddush, it is the first kos of the Arba Kosos, which is a mitzvah bifnei atzma. And here the Meshech Chochmah says, Kiddush is actually a celebration of the sanctity of the Jewish family and the holiness that exists between husband and wife. Kiddush means sanctification. Marriage is called kiddushin. Again, there are many reasons why it's called kiddushin, but at least one of the reasons is because it is the vehicle that brings sanctity and godliness into the world. So the kos of Kiddush is celebrating that first zechus of gedurim bi'arayos that protected us from spiritual assimilation. And indeed, Kiddush is all about the fact that God sanctified us and God chose us, meaning to say that we're not assimilated, we're not mixed in, we are distinct, we are unique, right? That is what Kiddush is. And the word kiddushin is a remez to the zechut of gedurim bi'arayos. And indeed, Rashi brings that whenever there is a gedur ba'arayos, whenever there is modesty and faithfulness and not violating the laws of sexuality, that is called kiddushin. Now, the second cup is magid. We recite the Haggadah over a second cup. And again, I want to emphasize, it's not just drinking it at the end. You have to recite the magid over a cup of wine. So when the Haggadah says, pour your wine at a certain point, follow that instruction because you got to recite it at that point. Now, what is magid? Now, here we're a little out of order, but the magid is the history of Am Yisrael. It reminds us where we come from. It reminds us that we come from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov that God made promises to. And it reminds us of our history and our common destiny. And therefore, the Magid corresponds to the sense of history, which is the third thing. Here's the second thing in the Haggadah becomes the third thing in our list of not changing the names, because it emphasizes our history, our past. And again, that's the great message of the Haggadah, that the Jewish people do have a history, a glorious history, in which God took us out of Mitzrayim with Nisim and Niflos, and he fulfilled the promises that he made to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And therefore, if Kiddush is a celebration of Gedurim Bi'arayos and the spiritual assimilation, the antidote to spiritual assimilation, the Magid is a celebration of history, historical continuity, which was shown in the merit of not changing the names, and that gave us that sense of history. The third kos is Birkas Hamazon. Now we know that Birkas Hamazon is ultimately all about gratitude. Right? That's why we bench. We bench because we have to give gratitude to Hashem. Now, a fundamental aspect of gratitude in life is Sameach B'chelko, to be happy and content in all that Hashem has given you. Pirkei Avos says, Ezeyu Ashir, who is a wealthy person? Hasameach B'chelko. So Birkat Hamazon, be grateful, be appreciative, be happy with what Hashem gave you. Now you also understand that when I can inculcate the attitudes of Sameach B'chelko, I'm not jealous of the good fortune of another. I don't begrudge another person whatever brachos Hashem gave them, because I rejoice in my lot and I have simcha in my lot. So memela, that's conducive to unity, togetherness, and achdus. Because so much polarization comes from rivalry. It comes from jealousy. It comes from begrudging the other person whatever good fortune they happen to have. And if Birkat Hamazon teaches me gratitude and Sameach B'chelko, that is conducive to achdus. So that corresponds to the sakana of physical annihilation and the antidote of lo dibru lashon hara, and that makes its appearance in the Seder, in the Birkas Hamazon, that creates the conditions where there's no need to build yourself up by tearing down somebody else. You can get joy in your accomplishment, and you can get joy in their accomplishments. That's Birkas Hamazon. We finally come to the fourth cup of Hallel. Now, the Hallel of Leil Seder, as everybody knows, is very, very unusual, because the Hallel at the Seder is split into two portions, two unequal portions. The first two chapters are recited before the second cup, and they are part of the Magid, they are part of the narrative of Yetzias Mitzrayim. But the rest of Hallel is after Birkas Hamazon, and it's recited on the fourth cup. And why is that so? Why is Hallel bifurcated, with the meal being in the middle? And the Rishonim themselves say, because the first two chapters of Hallel are about Yetzias Mitzrayim, are about the Exodus, and they are thanking Hashem for the miracles of the past. But the second, larger half of Hallel, by the time we benched, we ate, we benched, we drank the third cup. At this point, we opened the door for Eliyahu Hanavi, the harbinger of Mashiach. And we recite Hallel. This Hallel is no longer about Yetzias Mitzrayim. This Hallel is about Mashiach and Geula, and to understand that Pesach is a precursor for the ultimate redemption, for which we so much yearn and so much pine. That is why there is something very, very elevated, about almost mystical, about the Hallel after the Seder. It's a little unfortunate. Some people, sometimes even religious people, they sometimes leave. They figure, oh, the Seder is over after benching. Besides the fact that they're missing the fourth cup, they're missing Hallel. And granted, there's a little bit of a disadvantage because you're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to interrupt in that Hallel. So you can't really explain things. But one should sing it, and one should feel a lot of reverence, a lot of holiness. Because at this point, we are experiencing a future redemption. So what is that about other than hope? That yes, just as we say in the beginning of the Haggadah, now we are still slaves in one way or the other, whatever that means exactly, but we believe and we hope. And we affirm, it's not just hope, we believe there will be a Gula Hasida. So the Meshech Chochmah says, look at how everything matches up very, very nicely. 4 redemptions because of 4 dangers. 4 dangers are met with 4 behaviors mitzidenu. And those are celebrated in the Seder itself. The Kiddush is a celebration of the marital bond, and the Magid is a celebration of our history. And the Birkas Hamazon is the celebration of unity that can be achieved when each person is Sameach B'chelko, both in Gashmias, both physically and in Ruchnias. And Hallel is an affirmation of hope in the Geula Ha'asida. Now, I just want to end with a note that's a little bit of sobering. You know, we sometimes look at the Jews in Mitzrayim and we say, oh, they were so bad, 49th level of Tumah, etc. But, you know, if you think about it, look at the merits they had and compare it to modern society, and perhaps we might be a little wanting. Faithfulness to their spouses and no intermarriage. Well, you know that at least in the United States, in some parts of the United States, the intermarriage rate is 7 in 10 in some places. 7 in 10. That means 7 out of 10 marriages where one partner is Jewish, the other partner is not. So we really don't have that. The Lashon Hara, the lack of achdus, polarization, how much we suffer from that one. The sense of being connected to history through our Jewish names. So many people don't even know their history. In fact, somebody told me a story. They were a professor in a law school, and somebody went over to them and said, "Hey, did you ever hear of this Rabbi Elijah of Vilna? I hear that he's a famous guy. This is the Vilna Gaon." And the professor was so excited, and the person just said very casually, "Yeah, he's my great grandfather. I never really heard of him, but people tell me he was a big shot." Talk about not being connected to history. And finally, how many of us, even among the religious, actively yearn for Mashiach? Maybe intellectually we believe it, but is there a yearning? Is there a true desire? So the truth of the matter is, maybe in retrospect, the Jews in Mitzrayim weren't so bad. They had some very, very special zechuyot that we should try to emulate. So I think our time is up. I want to wish everybody a Chag Kosher V'Sameach, a wonderful Yom Tov, an inspiring Yom Tov. I know that, I think COVID is getting a little better, but still maybe people will not be able to be together with everybody they would want to be together with. But remember that we're connected to each other by our heart and by our soul, even if we're not in physical proximity. And most important of all, the Shekhinah HaKadosha is with everyone, particularly during the awesome nights of Pesach, and Golus will be the 2 nights of Pesach. And may all of you feel the loving presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whether you're with a lot of people, and even if you're alone. Hashem is with you, and no Jew is ever alone. So, Chag Kosher V'Sameach. Thank you.
Breitowitz, just want to thank you once again for a riveting part 2. And I know it will enhance all of our Seders, certainly mine very much. And I speak, I'm sure, to all the listeners. Okay, just to remind you.
You will. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Just to remind everybody that or.edu, the videos will be up within 24 hours. So 3 are already up. And Rabbi Breitowitz's part 2 will be up in 24 hours. So please feel free to review it or pass it to your friends, family. And we look forward to tomorrow. That tomorrow is a very critical day. It'll be the last part of our pre-Pesach seminar. We'll be discussing the halachas of Pesach, particularly this year when Pesach falls on Motzi Shabbos, and there are some complicated halachas as to when you can eat bread until and how you get rid of your challah and shalosh shudis, the third meal. A lot of interesting halachas which we will be going through tomorrow. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, 12:30. Have a wonderful day.